You surface from the underground at Piccadilly Circus,
Mind the gap.
making your way through the glittering lights of London's West End. You take a turn down a quaint-looking street into the notorious neighborhood of Soho. The lights are dimming, the crowd is buzzing, and you've just tuned in to the best seat in the house. Welcome to The Big Smoke, a variety show podcast. I'm Kevin Bennett, and I'll be your guide through this experience of comedy, conversation, and community. Today on the show, we are willing spring into existence. First up, I sit down with the rector of St. Paul's Church in Covent Garden. We explore the remarkable history of what's known as the Actors' Church and talk about how to navigate this strange in-between season when we're all longing for spring, but winter hasn't quite taken its final bow. Then we wander down to the Thames foreshore and meet with our resident Mudlark, Sean Clark. This week's discovery takes us back to the theatrical world when the playhouses lived south of the river and reveals the fascinating origin of the phrase box office smash. Of course, any successful lark ends with a pint, so we finish our journey with a trip to the local for a quick pub quiz. This round, Theatrical Superstitions. So, let's raise the curtain. Before preaching from the pulpit, Simon Grigg began life as a child actor, later working as a director and stage manager. He was ordained to the priesthood in 1990 and appointed rector of St. Paul's Church, Covent Garden in 2006. Please help me welcome Reverend Simon Grigg. Reverend Simon Grigg, welcome to The Big Smoke.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you so much, for being here. I wanted to talk to you about a few things today and learn about the lovely St. Paul's, not the St. Paul's maybe our international listeners are thinking of, but specifically the Actors' Church in Covent Garden. Do people ever turn up to St. Paul's thinking it's the cathedral?
They do. It tends to be Americans. Not that I've got anything against Americans. I'm married to one. But we do get every now and again, it doesn't happen that often, but every now and again we get somebody and say, is this where Lady Diana got married? And we say, no, you want the big one up the hill, so rather than our little one in the middle of Covent Garden. So yes, it does happen.
Well, it's a very unique church and there's some really special things about it, but I actually thought that we would start with how I stumbled upon it years and years ago. I think this was before I lived in London. I was walking around Covent Garden, as many tourists do, and I stumbled into the church, and I saw this very unique sign, which I'm not sure if this welcome sign is still there, but it was a welcome sign kind of talking about the church and the church's philosophy. And I wondered do you mind reading it? This is the sign.
Sure. I must admit, I didn't write it. I'd love to claim that I did, but I didn't. I actually found it in a cathedral and I took a photograph of it because I thought it made so much sense and it really encapsulated a lot of what we at St. Paul's believe and how we like to express ourselves and are trying to be as inclusive as we can be. So I think it's a great statement, and it goes like this. We extend a special welcome to those who are single, married, divorced, widowed, straight, gay, confused, well-heeled or down at heel. We especially welcome wailing babies and excited toddlers. We welcome you whether you can sing like Pavarotti or just growl quietly to yourself. You're welcome here if you're just browsing, just woken up, or just got out of prison. We don't care if you're more Christian than the Archbishop of Canterbury or haven't been to church since Christmas 10 years ago. We extend a special welcome to those who are over 60 but not grown up yet, or to teenagers who are growing up too fast. We welcome those who are in recovery or still addicted. We welcome you if you're having problems, are down in the dumps, or don't like organised religion. We offer a welcome to those who think the earth is flat, work too hard, don't work, can't spell, or are here because granny's visiting and wanted to come to church. We welcome those who are inked, pierced, both or neither. We offer a special welcome to those who could use a prayer right now, had religion shoved down their throats as kids, or got lost in Covent Garden and wound up here by mistake. We welcome pilgrims, tourists, seekers, doubters, and you.
I think it's beautiful, actually. I find it very
great,
moving.
isn't it?
And there's a wit to it that I was thinking is is in line with some of the actors that are memorialized in the church. So what was it about that specifically that when you read that you thought, oh, that really speaks to St. Paul's, affectionately known as the Actors' Church?
Well, it's a great question. And I think what it was this Covent Garden is, as you know, one of the biggest tourist attractions in London. So we get a phenomenal throughput of people. And for all sorts of reasons, some good, some bad, people often perceive the church as exclusive, as being homophobic, as being racist, as being sexist, as being ageist, all of which, by the way, it is. But we kind of wanted to say something different to people. And so, as I say, that we'd had other versions of it, but that one seemed to me, and as you say, there is a certain wit in it. There is a certain, and you'd be amazed the number of people who take photographs of it. In fact, so much so that we now have printed copies that we can just give to people. So, and on the reverse side, we fly the Pride flag during Pride Month, and even that is contentious because I've had people come in and demand that I take that flag down, and how wicked I am because I'm promoting homosexuality. We don't promote it, but recognise it's there. It's just a fact of life, and a good one too. So, yeah, if you are a Central London church, I think you have a responsibility to try and communicate something inclusive and welcoming to people because obviously in London, London is the whole world in one city.
Well, and there's something else about this church. I keep referring to it as the Actors' Church, which it is known as, that I think makes it very unique and very different. And also maybe some people might think there's a contradiction in that. So tell us, why is it called the Actors' Church, and what's the history and the story behind that?
I mean, sometimes that can appear like a contradiction because we are saying, we're for everyone, especially obviously those who live in Covent Garden or work in Covent Garden or spend their time in Covent Garden. And yet we also have this other title, the Actors' Church. So it could look a bit...
Well, actually, what I meant by that was more that I think, because I'm come from the world of theater and actors, and I think of it as the sort of heathens and the sort of the people who weren't accepted by the church and all the gays and all of that lovely, wonderful stuff.
Rock
and so
up with us.
To me is
absolutely.
That's what I sort of thought of it's almost like having the pride flag outside of the church in terms of what that is. But sorry, I interrupted.
No, not at all. How it comes back is every church of England, church in England, has what's called a parish, which is a geographical area. And St. Paul's, Covent Garden, became a parish in 1638. Wow. And then, it's old. And when Charles II came back to the throne in 1660, he licensed 2 theatre companies. Now, the reason for that is he'd spent the interregnum when, Cromwell and his not-so-merry men had closed down theatre and everything, and Charles II was in exile in France, where he spent a lot of time sleeping with women and going to the theatre. Not entirely a bad way of spending those 18 years, you might think. I, of course, couldn't possibly comment. So when he comes back to the throne, he wants theatre back. But what he doesn't want is the kind of Jacobean free-for-all on the South Bank of Shakespeare's time. Because, why? Politics. Because his father had his head chopped off. So he wants to keep control. And the best way to keep control is to license it. So he licenses 2 theatre companies, one owned by Thomas Killigrew and the other one by William Davenant, the godson, and some say the illegitimate son of William Shakespeare. And those become known as the patent theatres. And believe it or not, those 2 patents still exist. Yeah. They're now held by the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, and the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane.
Okay.
Both of which were and are in our parish. So we started looking after actors in 1662. So we've been doing it ever since. But you said about, the slightly disreputable. Now, here's within living memory. We had a wonderful church warden. He's not with us any longer. He died a few years ago, David. And David told me a story when he started going to St. Paul's in the 1960s. And 2 young girls, young women, sort of came into church and and he was just being very nice and said, "Oh, what do you do?" And they said, "Oh, we're showgirls, but please don't tell anyone." Because even then, there was something slightly disreputable about the theatre. And that's both fascinating, sad, and interesting that they felt able to come to St. Paul's Covent Garden.
And also, when I was reading up on you, you're not only the rector of St. Paul's Church, but you come from this world as well. So you were an actor and a director, stage manager.
Yeah. I was that terrible thing. I was a child actor. And
but you survived it.
I survived it just. I mean, it was, to say the least, somewhat difficult at school when you used to go off and do stuff. It didn't make it terribly popular. But I survived that. Then I went to university, studied drama, and that led to directing and stage managing and all of that sort of stuff. And then eventually I sort of changed course, changed direction, and went off to train as a priest.
And what was that? Were you just ready to try something new, or was there a specific?
No, I never wanted it at all. I was going to be Trevor Nunn. Well, that's what I thought anyway, which is ironic because I know Trevor reasonably well now. But no, it's hard to explain to people outside what the call to ordination, to ordained ministry is like. It's very personal. It's not, to be honest, particularly pleasant. And it takes quite a long time. It's not, I mean, it can happen to people, you think of St. Paul, the great flash of lightning and the road to Damascus and all that. And we've got a wonderful statue of that actually outside St. Paul's. But for a lot of people, it's not like that. It's more like a gradual thing. I've even said, you might have to edit this bit out, I've even said that I've sometimes described it as a bit like needing to go to the loo, right? You need to go to the loo, but you're busy. You're doing something. So you don't. And then you really kind of need to go to the loo, but you're still busy, you're still doing something, so you still can't. And then there comes a point where actually, this is non-negotiable. Yeah, I must do this. And as I say, it's not a close analogy, but it is.
It is a good analogy. Well, I wonder if it's related in any way to the calling of people when they're an artist or when they get called to the theater.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I feel many times my life in the theater and showbiz and storytelling and doing this podcast, all the different showbiz related things that I do. In many ways, sometimes projects and things start to happen, and then I look back and go, how did that? It's like I started doing it without even realizing it.
I think life only makes sense backwards, really.
Yeah.
But I also think that you're right. It is a calling. I mean, I inevitably quite a lot of young people sort of say, "Oh, I'd like to go into the theatre," and I always say, "Okay, could you be happy doing anything else?"
Yeah.
And if they say yeah, then I'll say, go do that.
Yeah.
Because, theatre is such a hard taskmistress. Only do it if you really can't do anything else. And if you can't do anything else, well, then you have no choice.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to do it.
That's it. You're in it.
And again, ordained ministry can be a bit like that. If you could be happy doing anything else, really, truly don't do it. But if you can't be happy doing anything else, I don't go quite as far as a friend of mine who's very hardline Roman Catholic, and his line is, well, what's happiness got to do with it? Which I wouldn't quite go that far. But people say, oh, you only have to work on Sunday, which is truly not true. And it's tough. You're dealing with the liminal moments of people's lives.
Well, exactly.
Birth, which is usually joyous, but not always. Marriage, which is pretty usually joyous, although sometimes you see some fallout, which is less great, and of course at death. So you're dealing with people's whose life experience is on the line, and that is of course a huge privilege. I mean, of course it is, but it comes at a cost.
And you're also kind of carrying, or maybe that's not the right word, maintaining or holding on to, as you said before, a parish. And so I can imagine when you talk about the cost, there's a pressure of influence, I guess, in some ways. I was thinking I went to the beautiful first Sunday of Lent service last Sunday and was listening to your sermon, and I was thinking, well, that's takes a significant amount of energy, not just to write it and to think about what you're going to say, but the weight that might have, in terms of people taking that in? Like, what's the process for you in terms of making the decision? Obviously, maybe there are certain themes and things that you're going to talk about at certain times of year, I guess. But like, what is the process of creating a sermon every week?
I'm not sure I know. I've been doing it so long, it kind of just happens. But no, it's an interesting question. I mean, at some times of the year, obviously Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, it sort of writes itself because, but yeah, well, how do I do it? I kind of, early in the week, I will look at what the readings are for the following Sunday. So it then sort of percolates through your mind for the rest of the week.
And those are dictated.
Those are dictated. There's something called a lectionary, which tells you what.
So you'll know what those are going to be.
So I'll know what the lessons are going to be. So then that will sort of percolate. Then I kind of sit down, usually on a Friday or a Saturday, because I need a deadline. I know clergy, say, for example, who will write all their Lent sermons, before the beginning of Lent. I don't do that because I need the pressure of a deadline. Secondly, of all, of course, you don't know what's going to happen in the world.
Well, exactly.
Of which perhaps the saddest example for me was it was going to be an August bank holiday Sunday, so there wouldn't be many people in church, and so I wrote this sort of knockabout sermon just with a few gags and and of course early on that Sunday morning Princess Diana died, which so that immediately went in the shredder and you had to say something entirely different. So but normally, so I'll ponder that as the week goes on, and then we'll try to anyway reflect some of the things that's going on in the wars in the world, wars and all sorts of things, and then I sit down and write it. And I know clergy who are cleverer than I, who can preach from notes and preach just having a few cue cards. I can't do that. I'm not good enough to do that. So
it's like scripted for you.
It's pretty much all scripted. Yeah. I mean, occasionally, like if I've not exactly forgotten but haven't got round to writing something, I will do them, but I don't do it very often because I'm scared of it.
It's a little bit like I took a course on stand-up comedy a couple of years ago, and the process that different comedians have, when they're developing their material, just reminding me of that, where I felt really comfortable with a really strong script as well. But then there's some people who will go up, they'll have a 5-minute slot and they'll have certain kind of main bits, and then they'll just talk about those bits, which I found that idea terrifying.
Well, me too. I couldn't do. I mean, most of your listeners won't remember this comedian, but there was a great comedian called Frankie Howard, and I don't think he ever told a joke in his life. It was all asides and comments, and it used to sound like stream of consciousness. It used to sound like he was making it up as he went along. It was not true. Every single bit was actually scripted.
Really? Well, that's the genius.
Every single pause, aside, look. It was all rehearsed. Now
I love that.
But to make that look
exactly, that's the skill.
Massively skillful.
Oh, I want to talk a little bit more about specifically the some of the ideas and things you talked about in the recent sermon that I saw. But actually, before we move on from the specifics of St. Paul's, the Actors' Church, I wanted to ask one more question about it, which is that one of the things that I notice when I'm walking around London, and I think it's St. Mary's near here where we are. The Actors' Church, St. Paul's, just looks architecturally quite different. It doesn't have a kind of conventional tall steeple and things like that. Yeah. And what is there a story behind why it's different?
There is, and oddly enough, it ties in with being the Actors' Church, though only coincidentally. So, St. Paul's Covent Garden was the first church built after the Reformation, after the dissolution of the monasteries, after Henry VIII's Reformation. So, when it was built at the request of the 4th Duke of Bedford, who was basically laying out Covent Garden, more or less invented town planning, kind of by mistake, really. Realised he needed a church. And he chose as his architect Inigo Jones. Inigo Jones was a great classical architect. That is to say, he took his inspirations largely from Greco-Roman architecture. And interestingly, Inigo Jones was also a set designer. He designed masks, which were amazing kind of theatrical presentations for the court.
Yeah.
And so he employed Jones to build this church. But he said, like a lot of rich people, he didn't want to spend a lot of money. And he said, I wouldn't have it much better than a barn. And Inigo Jones said, then you shall have the handsomest barn in England. And that's one of its titles, the handsomest barn in England. And you're right. It doesn't look like a, quote, normal church.
Yeah.
It looks more like a sort of temple.
Yeah.
It's very simple. There are no columns inside. It's a completely open space, which makes it look a lot larger than it is. And
yeah, it feels wider when you're in
it. It does, yeah, because there's no side aisles. You see,
Yeah.
you've just got this one open space. It's actually technically it's a double cube, weirdly, but also I've had an extraordinary experience. Some years ago, I was in Venice, as you are, and was having a tour of the Doge's palace.
Ooh, yeah.
And you were allowed. There was like a window, and you could look into the roof space, into the attic. And I just gasped, and I said to Paul, "My God, it's exactly the same as the roof of St Paul's." And you could see exactly where Inigo Jones got the idea. And so it is an unusual for an. In fact, depressingly, a few months ago, I heard two young guys sat in the garden, which was of course the churchyard, the graveyard, and saying, "Oh, I wonder what that building is." And you think, "Oh God, all the trouble I've gone to with signage and everything else to make it clear that it is a church, but no, I don't know what that building is." So
yeah, it does, and it does. I mean, in some ways, it looks like a rather beautiful barn. So I can see that kind of.
Well, it's because it's complicated by the fact that it's sort of got it's sort of the wrong way round.
Yeah,
because you've got the grand portico which faces onto the piazza, which 5 million people go across every year.
Yeah, if you're in Covent Garden, you see.
But you can't get into the church from there, and that again goes back into the dim and distant when it was built. So Inigo Jones intended that to be the grand entrance with the columns and, all very grand. But that would have meant the congregation facing towards the west. And standard Christian congregations face east towards Jerusalem, towards the site of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. So the then Bishop of London, Bishop Laud, who went on to be Archbishop of Canterbury, refused permission. So the whole church at the last minute was turned through 180 degrees.
Wow.
And the main door was bricked up and has never been used.
And you know what? There's a kind of beautiful irony in it, because where those columns are in Covent Garden, anyone who's been to London, it's kind of the main stage for street performers.
Very much so.
Back to the actors in the showbiz
Back to the actors in the
aspect of
showbiz.
it there.
Also, I mean, two other things that are famous on the portico. One is where Samuel Pepys first saw what he called the Italian puppet play, what we call Punch and Judy.
Okay.
And there's actually a plaque saying Pepys saw the first.
In the church, you have all these beautiful plaques to actors and theater people. Noel Coward, Charlie Chaplin, the person you just mentioned right now. How does that work? Who decides who gets a plaque? Do people commission that? I mean, there's some quite iconic.
Yeah, it is complicated because we have this sort of wainscoting up to waist height, which is wooden. Above that, there are some ancient memorials, stone memorials on the walls. For example, Thomas Arne, who wrote Rule Britannia. He has his memorial there. He was baptized and buried at St. Paul's. So we have those. Those can't be touched, and we can't add any more. Obviously, we're a Grade 1 listed building, so what we can do is circumscribed quite carefully. And rightly so. So the wall, the wainscoting plaques, which are on the wood, those we can be commissioned if somebody has been honoured by either the late Queen or the King. So if they're OBEs or knights or dames, that's it. And then we've also, back 3-4 years ago, we replaced our rather tatty, worn-out pews with rather beautiful new pews, which are movable, so we can flex the space in all sorts of ways. I mean, last week we did a fashion show. This week we've got an art show on. So that's great. But also we can again put plaques on the back of those, and again anyone can have one of those.
So, do you have a favorite plaque?
Gosh. Do you know, I never thought about that. I can tell you the popular ones.
Yeah.
The one I'm most asked about is, well, there's probably 4. Vivian Leigh, Richard Beckinsale, who of course died very, very young and was famous as Godber in Porridge and was totally brilliant. Diana Rigg, whose plaque is which actually I do have a favourite, which is Barbara Windsor, because Barbara's a good friend of mine, and she was a wonderful person. If I needed a sort of celebrity, I'd just ring her up and she'd just say, "Yeah, of course, darling," and So she was wonderful, and then sadly she got the Alzheimer's and eventually died. And when we talked about her plaque, although the press used to call her Babs, to her friend she was known as Bar. And then I had this idea of, we have a bar, and I had this idea of putting her plaque behind the bar, which we would then name Bar's Bar, which is what it's called. And we have a neon sign that goes up when the bar's operating, Bar's Bar. And so the plaque is there with her, Dame Barbara Windsor and her dates. And then the little line at the bottom just says, "Get out of my pub." So... which was actually my idea, and Scott, her widower, he was absolutely thought it was a wonderful idea. So yeah, that probably is my
your favorite plaque. I love it. So back to the messages in the sermon and things like that. I was thinking, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you around this time of year is because I actually find January and February, I always joke about this, especially February for some reason, such a bleak time. And I think a lot of people do, the days are still dark. It doesn't feel like the sun's coming yet. There's really nothing to look forward to because summer feels so far away.
Yeah. And this year, because it has never stopped raining. God.
So anyone listening in the UK will connect to this. I mean, it's been I think yesterday or the day before we had some sun and it was 17 degrees and finally,
so glorious.
It was beautiful. So I started thinking to myself, first of all, how do I cope? How do I yet another winter get through this time of year? And then I started thinking about various religious observances and rituals and things that might happen in different times of year that are ways of helping people frame what's going on in the world. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about those observances and things that, in the Christian church at this time of year, speaking of Lent and heading towards Easter. And so why don't we start by, I went to the first Sunday of Lent service, and one of the things I was struck by in your sermon was you talked about the fact that, most people know that the sort of tradition in Lent is giving something up for Lent, sort of fasting. But you were talking about perhaps embracing something that you love or almost bringing something in. So what were your thoughts around that particular message, and what do you think is useful for people to think about when it comes to the period of Lent?
When I was training, my training incumbent, that's my first boss, he used to refer to Lent as organised gloom. And that's always...
That is February.
Yeah, as you say, February is, the grimmest month, isn't it? Thank God there's only 28 days of it. And that's 27 too many, really, isn't it? So it sadly, and I don't know why, but sadly, there is this kind of perception that Christianity is all about doom and gloom and misery and self-hatred and all those sort of things. And that's largely the church's fault. Actually, Christianity is about joy. It's about you're loved. You are loved. You are adored by God. So, and that we should reflect that love in our own lives. And so whilst, as I said in the sermon, there's much to be said for prayer and fasting and good works. Yeah, that's all great, and I'm not knocking any of that. But I do think that it can reinforce a sense in which, everything is miserable, everything is awful, we're terrible, And I'm not sure that's entirely healthy. I think it can be pathological. And I think that there must be... Lent means spring. You are actually looking forward.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the sermon, which I've had no idea.
Yeah. And you are looking forward. Yes, you're looking forward to the darkness of Good Friday, of Jesus' death on the cross, because, this isn't mindless optimism. This is hope. And Good Friday, it comes from God's Friday, but why is it good? Well, it's good because Jesus is saying, I love you this much, even unto death, that actually I am abolishing death by dying for you. But of course, from that, and sometimes our society just simply wants to kind of abolish sorrow, abolish any sadness, abolish any kind of anything that hurts, and that's fundamentally untrue to the human inheritance. But we're also looking forward to resurrection. on Easter Day, when the church will be full of flowers, and we can't have lilies because of the church cat, because lilies, by the way, everybody, lilies are really, really poisonous to cats. Do not have lilies in your house if you've got a pussycat.
Wow. And so can you tell me, actually, I didn't grow up going to church, so I know very kind of rudimentary what these things come from. What does Lent actually come from in the Bible? What's the connection?
So the idea is that it is a reflection, however pale, of Jesus's 40 days in the wilderness. Now, in the Bible, 40 just means a long time.
Okay.
But, we all tend to be a bit literalist, don't we? So we codify it as 40 days. So it's a reflection of that 40 days in the wilderness, Jesus being tempted by the devil.
This is before he's on the cross. Before he dies.
This is at the beginning of his ministry. And in wonderful picture language, the Bible sort of talks about the devil coming and kind of prodding him and saying, look, I can give you all this, or look, you can do that, or you can be the other. And always what the snake is up to. Genesis calls the devil the snake. The snake is all of which sounds good. If you turned these stones into bread, well, in a world that's famished, great. But that's not what Jesus is called to do. And by the same token, whatever snakes are in our lives telling us to do things, they can look really good, but they're not.
And why is this period of time in the wilderness, he's fasting? Is that and why is he fasting?
Well, fasting has quite an important role in almost all religions. Interestingly, this year our Muslim sisters and brothers are Ramadan coincides with Lent, which it doesn't always, because it runs to a slightly different cycle, so it moves around the year in a way that Lent doesn't. But it's very interesting. I was talking to one of the Muslim teachers at my school yesterday, and they take it incredibly seriously. I mean, they can't even drink water in the hours of daylight, which is quite I sometimes say I wish Christians were as serious about Lent as Muslims are about Ramadan, but there you go.
And why is fasting such a universal across?
Well, it is pretty universal, and I think what Lent isn't is a subsection of the diet industry. Some people are
intermittent Lent,
exactly,
intermittent fasting,
giving up chocolate, which really does a disservice to it. I mean, it's actually about it's about a kind of deep cleansing of the soul. Some people have called Lent the springtime of the soul, and the idea of fasting is that it clears you out, if you like. It clears out all the et ceteras of life, so that what you're left with is the important stuff, the big stuff. Now I
spiritual spring cleaning in a way.
Spiritual spring cleaning, absolutely, but also very interestingly, Jesus says when you fast, don't let anyone know.
Oh,
so
because it's not about putting on a show.
No, absolutely
don't post
not.
it on Instagram.
Yeah, he says put oil on your face, and so that nobody knows. So that's always a kind of. As a corrective. We actually read that story on Ash Wednesday, which is actually the beginning of Lent, which for the mathematically inclined amongst your listeners, you will go, hang on, if you count from Ash Wednesday to Easter Day, it's not 40 days at all, it's 46. That's because all Sundays are feast days, because Sunday is the day of resurrection. So if you want to be literalist about this, you are allowed off on Sundays, because it's actually a feast day. And the fourth Sunday in Lent is a kind of a real release from the Lenten fast, and we celebrate Mothering Sunday on the fourth Sunday in Lent.
And so for the first Sunday of Lent service, we were just talking about perhaps bringing something into your life that you love. How does that then, talk to me a little bit about maybe why that comes in? If people walk into the church and are thinking, okay, I'm going to hear about fasting and kind of cleansing, and then they hear almost the opposite in a way. I mean, I loved it. I'm just curious. Yeah.
Well, I just think it's a corrective. I think you can overdo the doom and gloom. And I was sort of saying, there's nothing wrong with prayer and fasting, acts of good service, but I was just saying, maybe find something joyous. Maybe go for a walk. Yeah. Now that can be a different sort of cleansing. And maybe just have a little bit of silence. If that drifts off into prayer, so be it. But silence is golden. So do something. Music. You know, as I think I said, you know, it doesn't have to be St. Matthew's Passion, although it's not a bad idea. But you know, you can find joy in almost any music, actually, or drama, or poetry, whatever. It doesn't really matter, as long as it's kind of connecting you with the numinous, connecting you with what makes for joy.
Well, that brings me on to kind of the core question that I think about in this topic, and I was thinking about talking to you, which is, what do you think people who maybe aren't religious, or they have different faith or no faith, or whatever their situation is, what do you think they can take from learning about these traditions and these observances, whether it be Ramadan or Lent? What do you think? Because I think we live in, you know, more and more of a secular society that seems very, I talk a lot on the podcast about community and connecting to people. We're all in our own algorithms in our phones and things. What do you think people can take from learning about the core message and themes behind these ideas?
It's a great question. I think we all live in a kind of eternal present nowadays. We're all on our phones all the day. You know, we get news alerts every 10 minutes. We're just constantly bombarded, and it's a kind of eternal present. But that's not, I think, how human beings are meant to be. I think there's meant to be a shape to our lives. Obviously, there's a shape of our lives from birth to death. That's the one's obvious. But there's a shape to the year.
Yeah.
You know, from the darkness of winter, and historically, right back to, you know, pre-Christian times, people had a sort of a festival of the winter to kind of say, hey, yeah, guys, everything's terrible, but it will come back.
Light will return.
Light will return.
Yeah.
That's why we have Advent, which is very much a light-based festival. Again, other traditions, you think of Diwali. It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think there is a shape to the year. I also think there used to be a shape to the week.
Yeah.
You know, I
It's
think
so true. You have the Sunday roast. You have the big feast
you
after
used to,
church.
but now families don't have time to
Yeah.
sit and. How do you get to know your children if you don't sit down and eat with them? It's
Yeah.
madness, and I'm afraid that Sunday trading has done terrible things. You know, I remember as a child being bored on a Sunday, of course, because you know there wasn't much else to do. But it meant you sat down. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I was lucky enough, 2 parents, you know, and we all sat down and talked. And you got to know each other. So I think there should be a shape to the week. I think there should be a shape to the year that kind of moves through the darkness of the winter and like the sun gone, as you said earlier, and then the hope coming forward into the spring and just going and seeing the daffodils, which seem to be coming out earlier and earlier, by the way. It's really quite scary. Do you know I've got lemon trees with lemons on my terrace, which is really quite worrying, actually.
Oh my gosh.
But, you know, that shape going through the spring, through the summer, and then that elegiac season, which I don't much like, though other people love, of autumn. And then the cycle begins again. And I don't think just making every day the same is good for us as human beings. I think we need that shape, that looking forward, that looking back. You know,
There's a structure. It feels like, whether it's through ritual or tradition or whatever, there's a structure that helps us. And that structure, a lot of the time, seems to be responding to seasons and how we used to live, so much more connected to, you know, you'd wake up when the sun comes up and you stop working when the sun comes down. Yeah. Speaking of rituals and traditions, you know, I found, obviously I'd been to church when I was younger with my grandparents and at various special times of year and things like that. And so I knew when I went this past Sunday some of the things that happen in a service. But I was struck and reminded by a very simple kind of ritual and tradition, which is, don't know what the name of it is, but that one specific moment where everybody turns to each other and says, "Peace be with you," and makes eye contact. And it reminded me of, you know, as a theater director, sometimes it's, you know, on the last day of rehearsal or right before the first show with an audience, everybody, stage managers, will group hug, we'll stand in a circle. And sometimes I just say, make eye contact with everyone in the room. Because there's something very intimate about eye contact. And I was almost welled up in that service when I was looking around and there were I knew nobody there. And even people way across the other side of the church kind of made a point of making eye contact with me, and it was really special. So I guess my question is two-part. One, what does that specific part of the service mean to you? And then what is your favorite kind of ritual or aspect of this, container that we talk about that we as humans need?
The piece always used to be said, I think it was a bit before my time, but I think that the sharing of the piece, as we call it, I think it sort of came in the 60s or 70s. And when I was a little bit, oh God, I'm not, I'm so English, and it's like, oh God, do I actually have to touch somebody and, sort of. But then again, my training incumbent sort of said to me, Simon, bear in mind that for some people, it will be the only time in the week that they're actually touched. Yeah. That the only people who touch them. Now, obviously, and we saw how bad losing that was in COVID, in lockdown. So I think it's actually incredibly important, as you say, the eye contact, whether or not, some people still don't touch because of post-COVID, but a lot do now. So as my own favorite ritual part of the Christian year, for me is probably Palm Sunday, because
when is that, by the way?
That is the Sunday before Easter.
Oh, okay.
It reconstructs Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, where people cut palm branches and laid a carpet for Jesus as he rode on a donkey into Jerusalem. Now, if you're a really, really fabulous church, you, of course, have a donkey. All my congregation want me to get a donkey. We're not having a donkey. We are not having a donkey.
Somebody
I've done too many pantomimes.
Maybe
where the
dressing up as a donkey.
No, not going to happen. But you start somewhere else and you process. Yeah. And everyone gets a palm branch. We get ours from a collective in Africa, actually. And you get these palm branches, which you hold for the year, and then you bring them back in time for Ash Wednesday, which, as we said, is the beginning of Lent. And then I burn those and make the ash for Ash Wednesday. So they connect the whole kind of Christian year. So that's probably my favorite. But no donkey.
And Palm Sunday, Sunday before Easter, what's the main message of Palm Sunday?
It's a little bit complicated, but on Palm Sunday there would have actually been two processions. Pontius Pilate would have come from his palatial pad in Caesarea Maritima to Jerusalem, which he hated, because Jerusalem it's complicated, it's dirty, it's the center of all the opposition to Rome. So he doesn't really want to be there, but he has to come because Passover is politically very tricky. So he would have come into Jerusalem on a great big horse with hundreds of guards and trumpets and the whole flim-flam of the Roman Empire. And Jesus gently mocks it. He comes into Jerusalem on a donkey, on a beast of burden, and has people just lay down palms. And the people are saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, which again we sing. And so it's a kind of, okay, that's your world of power and might and violence and subjugation. This is my world of love and sacrifice.
I love that. Simon, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely great fun. Thank you.
In the heart of Londinium, London town, let's just call it the Big Smoke, is our river Thames. It is the living, breathing artery of our city, rising and falling every day with the tide. Because it is uniquely a tidal river, there are a group of licensed historians called Mudlarks who bring themselves to the foreshore every day and with only the naked eye help uncover the history of London in an effort to learn about the everyday people who have inhabited our corner of the world. So, it's time for us to venture down to the river and visit with Sean Clark the Mudlark to find out what has found him lately.
Hello Big Smoke listeners, it's Sean Clark down here at the Thames foreshore, and I wanted to tell you about a special object that found me very recently. But before we get going, let me tell you a bit about myself. I stumbled upon mudlarking in 2020 after my beautiful wife Trudy passed away. The peacefulness of the foreshore and the magic of the River Thames giving up its secrets on every tide is quite spiritual to me. I like to say that the artefacts find me rather than the other way round. Bone dice, beads, pilgrim badges and coins are some of the treasures that I've added to my collection of foreshore finds.
So, what do you have for us today, Sean Clark?
Today's find, Kevin, is called a knop, K-N-O-P, and basically it's right up your street, as I will explain. So the object was sitting amongst some small grained shingle on a cold bright day just along from the Tate Modern on the south bank of the River Thames. The place where I found it is just as important as the object. The item is a small fragment of pottery and it has a beautiful green glaze. Some of the glaze is speckled. It's 3 centimetres height and would have been the top or finial of a very special item. It is nearly 500 years old and the colour we call Tudor green because during that period that was basically the only colour that the Tudors used on pottery, made by using copper oxide. So, back in the 16th century, you would go to one of the 4 theatres in Southwark to watch William Shakespeare's latest play. You had a choice of the Globe, the Hope, the Swan and the Rose theatres, but you would need to pay an entrance fee. The fee would be a penny to be a groundling and get soaking wet if it rained. For an extra penny, you could get a seat, and for 1 penny more, you could get a posh seat with a cushion high up in the gods. Standing by the entrance to take your money would normally be a small child holding a small, globular, green glazed pottery money box. These money boxes were made to be smashed. All there was a small knife-made slot at the top of the money box for you to put the money in, but no other access points. When the performance began, the child would take the money box to the theatre owners in the box office, where they would smash them on the floor to retrieve the takings. A box office smash, if you will, and that's where the saying comes from. If the child was lucky, he would get a penny for his troubles. So the object that I've got today is the top of a Tudor money box, which would have definitely been used in one of the 4 theatres in the Southwark area. When they excavated the site of the Rose Theatre in the 1980s, they found 162 fragments of these money boxes, and nearly 30 of these fragments were these knops that I've got today.
Wow, what a beautiful window into history from Sean Clark the Mudlark. You can see an image of today's find if you follow us on Instagram at The Big Smoke Variety. Wow, and it's amazing how you can see it's still green. It's very much the color of the top of the money box. What an amazing thing. You'd think they would find a way to have a little lid or something like that on the top to be able to open it up so they don't have to smash it every single...
I think it's just so that people couldn't steal the takings.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There is a Mudlark that's actually found a near complete one of these money boxes.
Wow.
And the only bit missing is a hole that someone's knocked into the side of it, again, I believe, to take the money out of it.
Wow. That is so cool. What would you say is your favorite find so far? I mean, you found so many different things. I'm sure it's hard to choose, but if you had to choose, what would be your favorite?
It's quite easy to choose, Kevin. It's the Elizabeth I silver shilling that found me on Valentine's Day last year. I say it's a gift from my late wife. It was just sitting there looking up at me. It's beautiful, and I will always treasure it.
And you can hear more about this very special find if you look back in our episode library and search for the Sean Clark the Mudlark, where we feature the Elizabeth silver shilling coin. And if you'd like to learn more about mudlarking and what's going on in the wonderful world of the London mudlarks, what kinds of things do you have coming up this year, Sean?
We have something very special coming up at the end of March, Kevin. It's Hands-on History. It's a mudlarking exhibition at the Worshipful Company of Watermen and Lightermen at St Mary at Hill, not far from Monument Station. It's free entry and it runs from Friday the 27th to Sunday the 29th of March. It's in the most beautiful building. It's a guild. And what makes me chuckle is the ceilings in the main hall was plastered by someone called Josiah Wedgwood, which is mad. I just see him there with his trowel in his hand doing jasperware on the ceiling. Also part of the exhibition, I will be doing a walking tour around the streets of that area, talking about the traders who lived there in the mid-1600s and who issue trade tokens, telling you the stories of their lives and what was going on in that area.
Wonderful. So if you happen to be in London in March, we will link all the information to that in the show notes, and definitely worth checking it out. I've been to that building before, and it's absolutely beautiful to see the building, as well as, of course, all the mudlarks and their objects. And there's plenty to see. There's always plenty to see, so you can check out the latest finds of Sean Clark, as well as many other mudlarks, if you attend that exhibition. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing a bit about your wonderful world and the world of mudlarking here on The Big Smoke. If all this showbiz talk has you tempted to tread the boards yourself, then before you do, we'd better teach you a few of the superstitions that show folk take very seriously indeed. So, let's pop into the local for a quick pub quiz. This round, Theatrical Superstitions. Question number 1. In theaters around the world, actors often refuse to say the name of Shakespeare's play Macbeth inside a theater, instead calling it the Scottish play. The superstition comes from a long history of accidents and mishaps associated with early productions of the play. Tradition also holds that if someone accidentally says the name inside a theater, they must exit and perform a small ritual before returning. What must someone do to break the Macbeth curse if they accidentally say the name inside the theater? Question number 2. In the theater, performers are careful not to tempt fate or jinx a performance. So instead of wishing each other good luck, actors traditionally say, break a leg. But in French theaters, performers wish each other something quite different. What word or phrase do French performers traditionally say to wish each other good luck? And question number 3. It is traditionally considered bad luck and even dangerous to whistle in a theater. What do show folk believe might happen if you do? Well, that's today's episode. If you fancy yourself a natural thespian, you'll find all the answers to our pub quiz in the show notes. And thanks for joining us today as we ventured to the Actors' Church for a spot of spiritual spring cleaning, went for a lark on the Thames, and learned what not to say as you tread the boards. All in all, I'd say it was a box office smash. If you'd like to help the Big Smoke bloom this spring, why not share this episode with a friend? We'll see you soon in the Big Smoke.